The streets of Syracuse are burning. Roman soldiers pour through the gates, steel flashing, shouting in a language the old man barely hears. In a dusty courtyard, away from the chaos, he kneels over a patch of sand, drawing perfect circles with a stick. A soldier rushes toward him. "Get up, old man!" Archimedes doesn't move. His eyes stay fixed on the lines in front of him, a geometric problem more urgent to him than the fall of his own city. "Do not disturb my circles," he's later said to have replied. The sword comes down. In a moment, one of the greatest minds in history is gone, killed not defending gold or land, but a drawing in the sand. When we talk about rich people in the ancient world, we usually mean kings, generals, and merchants, men who owned land, ships, slaves, and treasure. Archimedes of Syracuse had none of that. He wasn't a conqueror or a banker. He was, by all accounts, a slightly eccentric mathematician and engineer living in a small city-state at the edge of the Mediterranean power game. And yet, more than 2,000 years later, we're still using his ideas. Our ships float because of principles he wrote down. Our engineers still rely on the mathematics he refined. Even the way we do calculus today carries his fingerprints. So this is a story about a different kind of wealth. Not coins, not palaces, but intellectual capital. Ideas so powerful they survive empires. We'll visit his world in Syracuse, follow the famous Eureka moment, unpack his breakthroughs in geometry and physics, look at his machines of war and peace, and see how his legacy was almost lost, then rediscovered. Because if anyone deserves the title Antiquity's richest mind, it's probably the man who died protecting his circles. Archimedes was born around 287 BC in Syracuse, a Greek city on the island of Sicily. At the time, Syracuse was rich but exposed, a major trading hub caught between two superpowers, Rome and Carthage. Grain, wine, olive oil and goods from all over the Mediterranean moved through its harbors. With that trade came money, culture, and constant military pressure. This was not a quiet philosophical retreat. Syracuse was a practical place. Ships had to be loaded, harbors had to be dredged, walls had to be maintained, rival fleets had to be watched. Every decision could have commercial or military consequences. Archimedes grew up in this world of merchants, sailors, and craftsmen. We don't know much about his personality, but ancient writers hint at a man who could disappear into his thoughts for hours, even days, and yet understood real-world problems better than most. There are suggestions he studied in Alexandria, in Egypt, the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world, home to the great library and museum where mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers from across the Greek world met and argued. Whether he actually lived there or not, the influence of that scientific culture shows up in his work. Rigorous proofs, clear diagrams, and a love for pure geometry that went beyond everyday needs. Back in Syracuse, Archimedes seems to have had a close relationship with King Hero II. You can think of him as a kind of court scientist, part mathematician, part engineer, part problem solver on call. If the king needed to move something heavy, test something suspicious, or defend the harbor against a fleet, the answer was often the same: ask Archimedes. One of the most famous stories from this partnership begins in a bath. Hiero had commissioned a golden crown as an offering to the gods. When it was finished, it weighed what it should. It looked magnificent. But rumors spread that the goldsmith had cheated, mixing cheaper silver into the crown and keeping some of the pure gold for himself. The king had a dilemma. He wanted to know if the crown was pure without melting it down. He turned to Archimedes. Archimedes needed a way to check whether the crown was made of pure gold without damaging it. One day, as the story goes, he was lowering himself into a public bath when he noticed water spilling over the edges. The deeper he went, the more water overflowed. In that everyday moment, something clicked. The volume of his body determined how much water was displaced. If he could measure volume through displacement, he could compare the density of the crown to a lump of pure gold of the same weight. Gold and silver don't just differ in color, they differ in density. A crown with silver mixed in would have a larger volume than a crown made entirely of gold, even if they weighed the same. By comparing how much water each displaced, Archimedes could tell whether the goldsmith had been honest. Realizing this, he supposedly leapt from the bath and ran naked through the streets screaming, "Eureka! I have found it!" Did it happen exactly like that? Probably not. The story was written down long after his death, and details were likely embellished. But the principle behind it is very real. From that kind of thinking comes what we now call Archimedes' principle of buoyancy. An object immersed in a fluid experiences an upward force equal to the weight of the fluid displaced. That principle explains why wooden planks float and stones sink, why steel ships can stay on the surface while solid blocks of metal plunge to the bottom, why submarines rise and fall, why hot air balloons lift off. The king's suspicious crown becomes our modern naval architecture. That's the kind of return his ideas have given over centuries. As striking as the Eureka tale is, it's only a doorway into his deeper work. Archimedes' real treasure was his mathematics. He studied circles, spheres, cylinders, spirals, and parabolas with a persistence that bordered on obsession. At a time when most people were content with rough numerical answers, he chased exact relationships. One of his powerful tools was a technique we now call the method of exhaustion. Picture a circle. You want to know its area, but you don't have the formulas we learn in school. Archimedes would start by drawing a polygon inside it, maybe a hexagon. The area of that hexagon he could calculate exactly. Then he'd increase the number of sides, 8, 16, 32, 64. With each new polygon, the shape hugs the circle more closely. The difference between the polygon's area and the circle's area gets smaller and smaller until it's exhausted, squeezed between two values so tightly that the true answer has nowhere else to hide. This approach, approximating a continuous shape by slicing it into many small, manageable pieces, is an ancestor of integral calculus. 17 centuries later, Newton and Leibniz would formalize calculus and change physics forever. But the mental pattern they used had already been explored by Archimedes, long before anyone had words for limits or integrals. He applied these ideas to spheres and cylinders, discovering results that delighted him. He proved that the volume of a sphere is exactly 2/3 the volume of the cylinder that just contains it, and that the surface area follows the same ratio. He was so proud of this that he reportedly asked for a sphere and a cylinder to be carved on his tomb, with their proportions clearly shown. For him, these relationships were his true monuments. And yet, Archimedes was never just a pure theorist. Again and again, he took these abstract insights and turned them into physical devices. One of the most famous is the Archimedean screw. Imagine a tilted tube with a spiral inside. Place the lower end in water and turn the screw. Water climbs the spiral and pours out at a higher level. It's simple, effective, and hard to break. Perfect for irrigation and draining flooded land. Versions of this device still operate today in agriculture and even in some modern industrial settings. He also refined the use of levers and pulleys. Archimedes studied how forces balance on a lever and showed that with the right setup, a small force can move a huge weight. In a demonstration meant to impress King Hiero, he is said to have single-handedly pulled a fully loaded ship towards the shore using a system of pulleys, ropes, and levers. This is where that famous line comes from. "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." Behind the dramatic quote is a solid equation. If you increase the distance from the fulcrum, you decrease the force needed. That's the physics of seesaws, crowbars, crane arms, and countless machines we take for granted. When war came, those ideas became weapons. During the long Roman siege of Syracuse in the Second Punic War, Archimedes reportedly designed defensive machines to protect his city. Ancient accounts describe giant catapults throwing stones at ships before they could get close. Smaller, more precise devices aimed at soldiers approaching the walls. And cranes, sometimes called claws, that could grab the prow of a ship, lift it and drop it, capsizing it in front of horrified onlookers. Roman writers complained that every time a soldier or ship came within range of the walls, some hidden machine would strike from above. Then there's the legend of the burning mirrors, massive arrays of polished shields or mirrors focusing sunlight onto Roman ships until they caught fire. It's a powerful image, and it appears in later stories and art. Modern experiments suggest it's unlikely to have worked as a practical battlefield weapon. Water reflections, moving ships, and smoke would all get in the way. Most historians think the tale is exaggerated or symbolic. Still, it captures how people saw his mind, almost magically powerful, able to weaponize nature itself. In the end, though, even Archimedes couldn't hold back an empire forever. Rome wanted Syracuse, and Rome usually got what it wanted. After a prolonged siege, Roman forces finally breached the city's defenses around 212 BC. Chaos followed: looting, fires, civilians fleeing, soldiers searching for valuables and prisoners. Some sources say the Roman commander, Marcellus, knew of Archimedes' reputation and ordered his men to capture him alive, hoping to bring this legendary engineer back to Rome. If that order was given, it never reached the right soldier. One version of the story says a Roman soldier came upon Archimedes sitting in the dust, drawing diagrams. When told to come with him, the old man refused until he had finished his proof. The soldier, impatient or simply not understanding who he was dealing with, killed him on the spot. Another version has Archimedes carrying instruments, compasses, a tablet, and the soldier thinking he was hiding gold or plotting something. Either way, the result was the same: one of humanity's brightest minds cut down in a random act of violence. The line, "Do not disturb my circles," may or may not be literally true, but it captures the bitter irony of his death. The man whose machines had terrified Rome died not on the battlements, but in the dirt, protecting a handful of lines that only he understood. After his death, Archimedes' works entered a long, fragile journey. Hand-copied by scribes, translated, summarized, and sometimes miscopied, many of his writings were lost. Others survived only by luck. In one remarkable case, a single manuscript of his works was scraped clean in the Middle Ages so the parchment could be reused to write a Christian prayer book. Under that later text, modern imaging techniques have revealed traces of Archimedes' original Greek, a hidden layer of genius, literally written over and forgotten for nearly 1,000 years. Despite all this, enough of his work survived to influence the great thinkers of later ages. Medieval scholars studied him. Renaissance mathematicians rediscovered his methods. Galileo admired his clarity. Newton built his theories on ideas that Archimedes had explored, in a different language and with different tools, but with the same relentless logic. His principles shape the world around us in ways we hardly notice. Pumps and screws moving water, cranes and levers lifting loads, ships and submarines designed around buoyancy, mathematical techniques that underlie modern physics, engineering, and even computer graphics. Every time we balance a beam, float a vessel, or approximate a curve by slicing it into thin pieces, we are spending coins from a treasury Archimedes helped fill. By ordinary standards, Archimedes was not rich. He didn't build a palace, lead an army, or found a dynasty. When Syracuse fell, his city lost its independence, its treasures, and its most famous citizen in a single blow. And yet, thousands of years later, his ideas still earn interest in classrooms, laboratories, shipyards, and space agencies. If wealth is what outlives you and continues to shape the world, then the old man in the sand may have been one of the richest men who ever lived, not in gold, but in the power of a mind that refused to be disturbed.